Good day, everybody. Welcome to Resolve to Live Forward. I'm John Morrow. Glad you're here. It's also, by the way, not Friday. It's actually Monday. Those of you who were looking to see or hear me on this past Friday, I apologize. I was simply in a situation where I was up to my eyeballs, as they say in crocodiles, and I was putting out fires. But here it is now, Monday morning. And oh, what a weekend it was. Not so much here in the Sunshine State, literally of Florida, but man, what was happening across the country with a a winter storm that was just a behemoth. Speaking of which, before I get into the actual talking points today on this edition of Resolve to Live Forward, I wanted to take a moment to thank all of you who have been downloading these episodes. I am surprised, thankful, and grateful for those of you that are actually downloading these episodes and listening to me or watching me. I want to take a moment to tell you that there is a podcast hosting platform called Buzzsprout. And I use Buzzsprout because Buzzsprout allows me to upload the both video and audio portions of this podcast to a platform where they will launch the platform at my direction and at the specific time that I prescribe. And they don't just launch it on this particular platform that you're on. For example, you may be on Spotify or you may be hearing me on the iTunes store on the Apple podcast platform. But there are other podcast platforms as well. So thanks to Buzzsprout for that possibility and that capacity. Thank you for your feedback and for your downloads and for your connections. And I hope I continue to serve you to the best of my ability. I will tell you that my email address is johnmorrowcoaching@gmail.com. And this particular podcast is also published on my YouTube channel, which is Resolve to Live Forward and John Morrow Coaching, or you just look me up under John Morrow and you will find me because I only have the one YouTube platform. I also have a Facebook page for John Morrow Coaching. I have a Facebook page for John Morrow DTM, Distinguished Toastmaster. I am an active member of Toastmasters International. And there's a lot of great stuff going on right now in my life, and I'm excited about it. I apologize for clearing my voice here on the microphone, but it's kind of like warming up, as you would say. All right, we are revisiting the word resolve, a power word, a power word that has been a part of the framework of my life since my wife and I first agreed upon it in November of 2017. Much has happened in that particular period of time. I have a book in the Amazon bookstore that was, excuse me, produced by Kindle Publishing. And it's entitled Resolve Your Blueprint for Intentional Success. It's available and sells in paperback for $14.99. And I hope you'll think about it the next time you're in the Amazon store. It's about 112 pages in length, and it is the story of the word resolve and how my wife and I fleshed it out, not just as to the word itself and what it means, but finding behaviors, best practices that would attach to the seven letters RESOLVE. We visit this process because I think this is applicable for life in the general sense, but I also want to flesh more out of it in terms of what it can and should mean to you. Now, I am looking here today at the second letter in resolve, and there are two E's in resolve. There's an E in the second letter position, RE, and then resolve also ends in the letter E. I'm specifically going to talk about the letter E that follows the R. And I'll remind you that R is for resilience. And it basically has to do with the premise that one responds and always moves forward and never retreats. And among the personal best practices involved with resilience, there is I acknowledge adversity without giving it permanent residence. I ask what is still possible before asking, why did this happen? I practice emotional stamina. I don't have it mastered. It is a continuing process, but I find time to rest, to decompress, and I get back up and get going once I know that I am ready in every way, form, shape, and fashion. And I refuse to let a singular bad moment define my identity moving forward. I've had many bad moments and done some pretty just boneheaded, dumb things, but I've also been a victim. We're all victims of some sort, and some victimization situations are very, very severe. But in my particular situation, the most severe and devastating victimization moment, which was by far the most traumatic thing that has ever happened to me, is watching my wife die. And what that did to me, it's kind of like turning yourself inside out and then splattering everything. And I know it's a very, very ugly graphic, but I want you to understand when you lose the most important thing in your life, the most important thing in your life, you react, and you react in a not so good way. It was devastating. There had to be a choice made, and the topic of my TED Talk coming up on February 21st here in Central Florida is living forward is a choice. And part of the living forward process is the power of the word resolve. And resilience, obviously, is very important because resilience is not about toughness, it's about continuity. It's about being consistent in doing the best practices, whether you feel like doing them or not. You have to make up your mind. It's an intentional thing. Now, engagement, the whole idea of getting out of bed every day, in and of itself, depending upon how you feel and what you have gone through in the previous days, is really, in a sense, a factor that will play itself out when you wake up and realize that you need to now not just wake up, but you need to pull yourself up, turn yourself on the side of the bed, put your feet on the floor, and stand up and engage the day. It's now today. In this particular case, in this recording, it's Monday. As I said, I should have released this episode this past Friday. And I will be working on the next episode, possibly later today, to record to be out this forthcoming Friday. But getting back to the principal point, engage the day with intentionality. What does that look like? Well, let me read to you some things that I pulled up. When you engage your day, you show up fully. You show up fully to people, to the moments that occur, and to opportunities. I would even say that you show up fully ready to engage the unexpected. Now, that having been said, you do have to make good decisions. If you see something coming that looks like you might be engaged by it, but it poses to you a potential problem, there's nothing wrong with turning and going the other way. There's nothing wrong with moving yourself towards a collective and having some people around you or having some protection around you. We live in a world that is full of all kinds of situations and people. There's also the situation of life itself, nature, activities. Think about it for a second. Over this past weekend, a massive, massive winter storm, one of the worst on record, started down in the area of Texas and going through the Gulf Coast and the Southwest and making its way in a kind of an east northeast direction, swiping across a vast section of the southern Midwest into the Tennessee Valley, up into Kentucky, all across Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and it funneled itself up into South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and now it's moving itself up and across the Northeast, and it's affecting people all the way up into the state of Maine. A lot of ice. I looked at some video on YouTube, saw all of the ice storm in Nashville. Nashville was where I lived for 4 years as a college student, and that was back in the period between September of 1969 and June of 1973. Nashville was where I met my future wife, who I would later marry in August of 73 and was married to almost 46 years before she passed away in 2019. But I looked at the pictures from around Nashville, and Nashville was especially hit hard, not to minimize that this ice storm was affecting people in all kinds of places, and ice storms are almost unprecedented in the South. You just don't have something like this come, and from an infrastructure point of view, whereas there are places further north and further to the Midwest and to the West that are equipped to some degree to handle situations like this because it's a matter of life. It's a day-to-day routine. But when you get an ice storm like that, I'm reminded that in 1960, when I was just 10 years of age, and you have to look it up on YouTube, but if you go back to 1960, there was an ice storm that happened back in 1960. And there are pictures that you can look at. Where I lived at, of course, was where Lookout Mountain was. And the ice was so massive, it snapped trees. It literally snapped them. And after the ice melted and you looked at the landscape of Lookout Mountain along that stretch from Chattanooga going in a south, slightly southwest direction as it wove into Georgia and then into Alabama, that mountainside looked like it had been bombed out. Trees were devastated. You can still to this day go and find places where, of course, vegetation has grown up around and everything's come back and there are trees all over that mountain. But you can still find places where those trees from back in 1960 were literally snapped. It's an amazing thing to see, but that's part of the engagement of life as you see these things and you wonder how you move forward. Well, when you show up to people, to the particular moments, and look for and pay attention and engage opportunities, you are creating for yourself a climate where you can benefit yourself, but you also can benefit others. Remember the phrase where I told you that I heard my good friend, our Toastmasters Club Growth Director, say, when I joined Toastmasters, I joined to get something. But when I continue to stay with Toastmasters and I remain with Toastmasters, I remain because I want to give something. So you have to think about your life as an opportunity for giving as well as getting, because if you have a self-focused, centristic approach to how you live, you're going to put yourself in a position where you're going to be disappointed a lot. And when you see something, you'll also tend to take advantage of people. And to me, that's very much not just a self-centered mindset, a narcissistic mindset, but it's even a bit predatory, if you don't mind me saying so. And even if you did mind me saying so, I have to say there are people who are looking for what they can get out from others without any regard for the consequences of what it does to others and what it does to their own reputation. So when you're out there engaging life in every day, and particularly in life, you're going to engage people and you need to make eye contact, discover the practice of what I call intentional listening and being very generous with your listening and attentiveness. And when you do speak, speak with truth, authenticity, intentionality, but also be sure to weigh your words. You may not necessarily agree with something, but the question we should always ask ourselves is it worth the argument? Is it worth the possibility of creating divisiveness? Now, if you're with somebody who is willing to engage and has an open mind to have a conversation with you, and you can talk about those points that you don't necessarily agree about, but you also work on the things that you do agree about so that you can build a relationship where you don't have to agree about everything, but what you do agree is that the world is a better place when we learn to get along with each other. And it's hard to get along because this is one of the most divisive seasons that I've seen in my entire lifetime. I've seen our country together. I've seen our country fractured. I've seen all kinds of situations. I grew up from 1950 when I was born until now. If you go do your history, the real history, you'll discover that there were a lot of things going on that I was raised in that were very divisive, very much wrong. But there was also a lot of good that was being done. So eye contact's important, and listening with generosity and focus is extremely important. The idea is help me understand. Let me have the opportunity to know as much as I can, and let's find what we see in each other that we can share together and work together to make the world a better place. Always stay present mentally. There is this thing about presence, and one of the things that I've had the opportunity to do, and it's hard and it makes me very sad, but I've had the opportunity as a griever, as a person who lost his wife, to be in the presence of those who are now going through that type of a situation. It could be a spouse, it could be a parent, it could be a sibling, it could be a child. Mm. But in all cases, sometimes the most important part of engagement is not what you say, it's what you don't say is you remain present. Your presence is saying, I get you. I understand. So stay present instead of mentally rehearsing the past or worrying about the future. Be immediate. Live in the now. Seek meaningful connections. Always seek meaningful connections. Don't be passive about the surroundings. Here's an interesting thing. I'm sure you go shopping. I'm sure that you go to work every day if you're working. I am not working, I'm retired. But wherever you go, if you are here and not out here, you're missing things. I once talked about in a speech things we see but don't always notice, or another particular phrase was, I never noticed. And it had to do with things that were evident. They were there, they were persistently there. But I was too busy being in a disconnect about what was going on in my mind. And it was really more of an introspective situation, but this introspection was self centered, very selfish. When I watched that experience of my mother beginning to break down because of what we would later determine was Alzheimer's and vascular dementia, I realized that the warning signs were always present. They were. They're subtle at first. And it's important to note, too, that dementia, which comes with Alzheimer's, but you can have dementia and not necessarily be diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And I'm not a clinician, so understand this is what I've studied coming from a family on my mother's side that was ravaged by this entire cognitive brain disease family of maladies. I learned that there are clearly visible, obvious things taking place, and they are clear signs. And even as I have aged, I have found that sometimes I have memory lapses. That having been said, because I participated in Alzheimer's studies sponsored by major universities, and was a participant over a period of 5 years. I was thankful to discover that in terms of the genetic propensity that is there among Alzheimer's victims and potential Alzheimer's victims, that particular genetic marker of the ones that they've so far been able to identify does not appear in my gene makeup, which tends to say that in the inheritance situation from my parents, my mother and my father, I inherited more of the genetic brain capacity that my father had. My father was sharp and brilliant and very much engaged and understanding of situations in his life until the day he died. And sadly, what killed my father had nothing to do with Alzheimer's. It had to do with postoperative problems after having prostate surgery. So the thing again is that you have to see these things. You've got to be willing to notice. And in noticing, it also helps you to better set yourself up to be prepared for the unexpected. We can't be prepared for every unexpected situation, but I am thoroughly convinced that the more we focus on what's right there in front of us in whatever we're doing, we have a better opportunity to respond in the correct way. But you have to engage the opportunities. This also requires to seek meaningful connection and to participate in life through that connection and not be passive about the opportunity in life to create relationships. And whatever you do, don't sit on the sidelines waiting until you feel ready. Boy, there's a powerful statement. When you feel ready, I once heard a phrase that says, if you wait until you feel ready, you'll never be ready. And I believe that. I think sometimes you have to say, I'm as ready as I'm going to be, so let's get going. And you have to talk yourself out of the idea that you should wait because you want a more opportune time. Well, what if opportunity is now? You really need to have courage. Living forward involves being a truth teller. That involves authenticity. This has to be where you are who you are. You don't find purpose by hiding from what's going on around you and shutting yourself away. You discover what's available to you by putting yourself out there. But as you put yourself out there, you put yourself out there with that sense of life's an adventure. Life presents opportunities. Yes, life also presents challenges. But this is the case for all of us. Now, I cannot, in all good conscience, say that this particular message that I'm sharing with you today on Resolve to Live Forward applies to everybody. The realistic truth is everyone comes from different dynamics. Call it your environment, call it the culture, call it the society, call it your nation, call it your faith, your religion, if you want to call it that instead. Call it the political climate of your country, or even the climate of your country as it relates to the haves and the have-nots. I can't speak generally, and everything that I say would have a profoundly positive impact upon everyone who might possibly come across this podcast or this YouTube video. What I can say is that if you have had a framework in life where you have reasonable opportunities and you have not been subjected to some forms of abuse, and there are many, and you have a basically healthy lifestyle, and that includes having a healthy mindset, then the thing you must do is you must always be working to exercise your mind through the behaviors that are spotlighted in the power word resolve. Resolve is defined as having a definite, firm plan of action. Have a definite, firm plan of action. But don't make that definite, firm plan of action so hard and fast that it does not allow for the opportunity to learn, to be enlightened, and to physically, mentally, financially, spiritually, and relationally grow. To learn more about how you best fit, not just within your own family, but with your extended families, your community, and even how you fit with those communities out there that are not aligned with your particular set of values. How do we solve the problem of divisiveness? And divisiveness, by the way, isn't just a problem here in the United States where I live. Divisiveness is something that has been going on since the beginning of recorded history. There are those that have and those that don't. There are those that have power and want to exert that power upon others, and it's their goal to bring people in line with their value system. And in all those cases, unfortunately, the problems and the woes of the world have to do with being selfish. It has to do with narcissism. And narcissism ultimately ends in evil and persecution and can and does lead to wars and genocide. That's just me talking, and I'm getting into an area that's troubling to a lot of people and it makes them sensitive. But my desire is to never put myself in a position where I have made someone feel like they are inferior. If I cannot, in all good conscience, be the best version of myself, it's better to step away and go someplace and get myself out of that environment because I don't bring anything of value to that environment. I'm glad for the fact that I have the opportunity to do this podcast. And I think this podcast has the opportunity to help you with thinking in terms of behaviors that spin the normal narrative from looking for what's wrong there and pointing it out to looking for what's right and engaging it. I could talk more and more about it, but next week, this coming Friday, actually, when the next episode comes out, by the grace of God, I'll be talking about serving. And serving is an important thing because this brings to head the whole idea of a selfless mindset, of a living forward mindset, of a connectivity mindset, of a mindset that says, let's engage, let's learn, let's understand, and let's serve. I look forward to talking to you about that when we get together this forthcoming episode coming up on Friday. In the meantime, thank you for joining me today. I apologize again for being late in publishing this episode, but I'm glad you're following me, and I hope you'll continue the downloads and reach out to me and connect with me if you would. I would love to hear from you. And if you're watching this on YouTube, would you please like and subscribe so I can see if, in fact, my videos are in any way, form, shape, or fashion connecting with a group of people out there who share and who, in fact, can bring to the table other great ideas that we can put together to create a better opportunity for all of us to learn the process of living forward. You have been listening to and watching, if you're on YouTube, Resolve to Live Forward. I'm John Morrow. Again, my Gmail is johnmorrowcoaching@gmail.com. That's johnmorrowcoaching@gmail.com. And you can find me on YouTube under John Morrow DTM or Resolve to Live Forward. Look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you for joining me. Please have a great week. And no matter where you are, I hope for the best for you as far as the weather situations are concerned. Everybody out there, keep the folks in the areas of the ice storms in your thoughts because there are literally hundreds of thousands of people without power right now because of down power lines and trees. But for now, it's time for me to wrap it up. Have yourself a good day. I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. This is John Morrow saying so long for now.